Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna let people trickle in here. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Okay, looks like we're kind of holding steady at a number here, so we can get started. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. The topic today is grief, and we are so lucky to have Dani and Ladybird co-hosting this discussion. Dani, Ladybird, I'm hoping you can just do a quick intro of yourselves to everyone.
Totally. Ladybird and I were joking yesterday that we wished we had a BJ Miller face filter function on Zoom, but unfortunately not. So my name is Dani. I'm a physician trained in both palliative medicine and psychiatry at UCSF, and I'm really excited to be here.
And I'm Ladybird Morgan. I am a nurse and social worker, also trained in hospice and palliative care, and delighted to be here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, short and sweet.
Yes. Ladybird, if you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of give everyone a lay of the land. All right, so if you've been to these before, this will be repeat, but for any of the newbies, Dani and Ladybird.
Yes, I'm
Dani
a
and
newbie.
Ladybird are going to go through the slides and just kind of do a level setting on, the overall topic of grief. And then after that, we open it up to your questions. And there are two ways you can do this. You can click the raise hand button and we will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. And if you prefer to not do that, you can type it into the Q&A section and I will read it aloud for Dani and Ladybird to address. So again, you can raise your hand, ask it out loud, or type it into the Q&A section. And one very important note here is that this is meant to be a very safe space. And to that end, if you would like to remain anonymous, please just let us know when you type in your question and we will not read your name out loud. And thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
All right. So what is grief? Big question. Grief, I guess, sort of in the simplest terms, I would say, is the pain of loss, right? It's what we experience and feel, emotionally, physically, as the result of loss. At the same time, I would say that grief is how loss heals, right? So grief is inevitable, right? I don't want to contradict the famous, death and taxes quotes, but I would say that sort of one of the most, or two of the most fundamental certainties of humanity are actually death and change, right? So grief sort of inevitably ends up being the price that we pay for living, the price that we pay for loving. I think it was Khalil Gibran who said, the quote was, "The deeper that sorrow carves into our being, the more joy you can contain." But this idea that our capacity for love and our capacity for pain comes hand in hand really resonates for me. And we're in really good company, right? Because it's interesting how isolated we can feel in our grief, and yet it is one of the most sort of fundamental human experiences. So I don't know, I could be forever, but Ladybird.
No, it's such a, I agree. It's one of the ways that we remember that we're human. That's how we connect to the world around us. And some people call it the language of love, but grief is actually one of the ways we communicate our love for life, for living, for anything. So it's not a medical condition. I think we've sort of tried to categorize it as a medical condition that needs to be managed or overcome or sort of put into a container, but it's actually an experience that is living and vibrant, and there isn't like a beginning and an end. It just becomes a part of our lives. And honestly, we probably start grieving the minute we're born, because we are traumatically pulled from this very warm, safe environment into an oxygen breathing reality. And the grief, probably we start crying. Our first expression in life is crying, which is rather interesting. So it's not something that is so foreign to us. It's actually a friend. It's another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Let me go to the next slide. So yeah,
yeah, oh.
no, go ahead. No, I was,
Cool. So what I will say as a side note, Ladybird, BJ Miller once told me, I found with time that when you fumble, people find it really endearing. And I had to tell him, no, BJ, when you fumble, other people find it really endearing. But anyhow, so what do we grieve? I think sort of the prototype of what we think about when we think of the word grief is sort of the death or the loss of somebody important to us, right? And my goodness, do we grieve those losses? But there's also so much more that we grieve when a loved one is, or ourselves is facing a serious illness, right? There's a loss of a sense of security in the world, a loss of the dreams we may have held for our future, right? At times a loss of function, of capability, of dignity. And I think sometimes serious illness ends up feeling a bit like loss after loss after loss for some of us. I think it was BJ who made the point when we were in the conversation about holding expectations loosely, that in order to connect to new hopes or new meaning, we need to allow ourselves the space to grieve just the sheer number of losses that come with being ill. And Ladybird, I think you were referencing this before, but we're focused right now on illness, but I think you're right. There is a core truth that, we're always grieving, right? To be alive is to be changing. So, and to be changing is to constantly be having both grief and possibility, right? Fear and excitement. My eldest turned 7 this week, and I had this moment at her birthday party. It was really in my head, like thinking, how is her childhood slipping away? And my 4-year-old, bless her heart, sat down next to me and said, "Mommy, you're missing 6-year-old Zaina, aren't you?" But it was just really beautiful because we were in the midst of celebrating this new person while also saying goodbye to an old person, kind of embedded in our lives. But
yeah,
I think
the threshold.
and I think one of the hard things about grieving with serious illness is the losses are so big, but the promise of what's awaiting us doesn't feel as present as it does with all the other grieving we do in our lives.
That's it. I like that point, the promise of what's awaiting. And that might even be the preciousness of grief, is that you're sort of marinating, for lack of a better word, in that liminal space before you've received or acknowledged or experiencing what is awaiting you. It's that place of transformation and transition that we don't, in our culture, I say I don't experience the American culture honoring transitions very well within a lot of space or time. You have like 3 days of mourning after someone dies, and honestly, I'm not even sure what we're allotted when we are diagnosed with an illness, or the doctor gives us a diagnosis, and it's as though we're supposed to just immediately be in a place of acceptance or know how to work with it. And that threshold of crossing from who you thought you were to who you are now, not getting to the place of what you're going to become, you're not there yet. That's that territory of grief. And it's a really rich territory that can really, crack us open. It does crack you open. Doesn't have to necessarily be seen as a negative space to land in. It actually can bring a lot of information and guidance and wisdom.
Yeah, and when you talk about that moment of getting the diagnosis, you're triggering me to remember just also the idea of anticipatory grief, right? Like grieving things that we haven't lost yet, but we see coming, and all that's wrapped up into that. So
yeah, and I think it's not to get too like existential and things, but like this idea of a lot of people learning about impermanence and not being attached, and sort of misunderstanding that attachment doesn't mean that you don't care. That doesn't mean that you weren't connected to something. It just means you're acknowledging that it's not staying the same, but you get to still have an emotion about it, an experience about that loss and that change. That's not the same as not being attached. And I kind of would be fearful of a reality where I wasn't allowed to attach to something, how empty that would feel.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So how do we grieve? What does it look like? And I sort of think this is a trick question because there is no one thing that it looks like. I remember as a kid learning the parable, about the blind men touching the elephant. I think it was three blind men, and for the life of me, I don't know why it's always men. It's always men. We'll roll with it. But they were all touching the elephant. One was touching the trunk, one was touching the tusk, one was touching the belly. And as they described what they were feeling, they were describing these seemingly very different things, and yet they were all actually describing the same thing, right? It was still just the elephant. So what I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is that grief is like an elephant, right? There are so many sides to it, and grief can look so different from one person to the next person, and yet it doesn't mean that any one experience of it is invalid, right? And there are undoubtedly shared elements of grief, but it's going to look different between people based on, you know, our relationship to the person we lost, or how we felt about them during life, our age, right? Grief of a 5-year-old is different than grief of a 50-year-old. Our psychology, our history of attachments and coping and losses, the culture that we come from, and, you know, what our mourning rituals look like. And I just so often, I don't know if it's the same for you, Ladybird, but I've so often had patients or clients or loved ones who come in kind of insecure about their grief experience, right? Like, I shouldn't still feel so excruciatingly sad, or, you know, why don't I feel sadder? I feel like I should be feeling worse about this, right? Or I feel so relieved that they're gone, all the way to like, I didn't even like them. Why am I not relieved right now? And honestly, if I could take that should word out back and beat it up, I would, because the reality when grieving is that we should feel just whatever it is that we're feeling.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've said it all. In fact, Dani, you were sharing a story with me about a video clip from Steel Magnolias, where they're laughing. And I mean, we opened this webinar, both of us laughing, because we're making all these little blunders, but it seemed appropriate because laughter is as a form of grief. You know, it's moving through us. If you think of grief as an expression of love, you express love in many different ways, and it's going to move. It's your entire being that is actually expressing grief. So sometimes it comes through stories, it comes through singing, it comes through crying, it comes through talking to friends. That can be an expression of grief. Baking, you know, what you do with your hands, the way that we use our bodies, taking a walk can be an expression of grief, because again, you're moving that tidal surge through your system and you're acknowledging it. So there isn't it has to look like this. You need to have a candle, put a certain bit of salt over your shoulder, you know, write a letter. I mean, all of these different things that can work and that do work and that are beautiful. I think really to kind of remember that it's an expression, and there isn't a right way to express anything.
Totally. And thank you. This is my favorite movie scene. I love that you laughing through tears is my favorite emotion.
Well, I think, you know, I actually remember being at a funeral when I was young, and a couple of my cousins and I feeling such a wave of energy around seeing our parents so distressed and the loss of our grandmother. And we started laughing. And, you know, I remember feeling kind of ashamed and bad. Nobody stopped us, but it had this sort of quality of, are we supposed to be doing this? And it felt like such a relief.
Yeah.
But we couldn't really express it to anybody, the relief of grief sometimes.
Totally. Which I think ties beautifully into the next slide, that grief is dynamic, right? We talked a little bit about how grief can look different between people, but it's dynamic within people, right? Moment to moment, it looks different within ourselves. I think historically people got very excited about this idea that there are, you know, stages of grief, things like shock, denial, anger, guilt, you know, bargaining, acceptance. But in reality, it isn't like we complete one stage and then move on to the next stage. Rather, we're sort of fluidly swinging back and forth between so many of these different feelings and experiences, right? It just like you're describing, right? In one moment, we can feel the most excruciating pain of missing somebody, and then suddenly find ourselves laughing hysterically, thinking about, you know, something they would have said if they were right next to us in that moment, or, you know, anything. So, and grief is dynamic over time, right? It doesn't end, but it does change over time, right? It might be years after the loss of somebody and you smell a fresh croissant, and for whatever reason that makes you think of them, or you're walking into a conversation and you just hear their voice into your head. And it's funny. It's just interesting how it evolves and how it sneaks up on us sometimes.
Yeah, and it can also become quite precious and familiar in its, you know, in its texture of how we hold it close. I mean, I think of a grandmother that I lost during COVID time, and you know, when I see her picture, it's where I can see it every day. But it brings up a wave of emotion, even though I go through the entire day living my life and things are happening and I'm making a relationship with the distance there, but there's this sort of, oh, I still remember her. I still love her. There's a gratitude that I experience. And that's a dynamic quality of like, oh, this loss that I didn't want to have happen. And yet I'm glad that I can still remember the preciousness that I felt towards that person. And we can feel that same way with our body and our health, holding on to who we were before doesn't mean that we can't also move forward into who we are becoming and what's happening us. We can still honor that person that existed. We don't need to somehow banish them or pretend like, okay, we're moving on. It didn't, it's not, doesn't matter. It still matters. And I think that's important to remember.
Totally. Once again, it's a beautiful tie to the next slide, right? Grief changes us. And just like you're saying, Ladybird, I agree. Like, we are never the same. It doesn't mean we don't live again. It doesn't mean we don't heal. It doesn't mean we don't rebuild. But both ends of the dialectic are true. We're never the same again. And we find a way to move on forward, right? I think for some of us, that urge that you're talking about is so strong. How do I get back to the person that I was, right? When will I feel normal again? When will that be me again? And my answer to that is never, right? But I encourage you to embrace the new you, right? The changed you. And isn't it sort of actually appropriate that we would be changed? I think on the other side of that spectrum, that there are some of us who feel sort of the opposite fear, like a fear that moving forward means that we're letting go or, forgetting a person. And to that, I would answer that, although our relationship to grief changes, we actually never let it go. So, when the time is right, give yourself the permission to walk forward with it.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you're always happy about it or understand where that's going or even agree with it necessarily. I mean, I think sometimes it can sound very glib to be like, just move forward, just be grateful, just, you're moving into this new life. And that's not really what we're saying. It's this both and. I mean, if anyone's heard me before, I say that all the time, both and. And Francis Weller, who I really admire in terms of his work with grief, wrote the book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. If anyone doesn't know it, I highly recommend it. And he talks about grief as an initiation process that changes you through initiation. You're totally ripped away from what you thought was your life and reality. You have to re-look at who you think you could be or want to be or can be. Like, there's this restructuring that happens. And then stepping into that unknown territory of, okay, this is this new place. Where am I going? How am I going to get there? What are the resources and the supports to hold this new person that is emerging? And there's also a beauty in that newness, right? It's like, oh yeah, that what I had and what existed, nothing can take that away. Nothing can change that. It isn't going to actually, there's sort of a way that keeps the beauty of what was before real and true. It was there and now you're over here. And in that initiation process, it helps to have support. That you don't do initiations by yourself generally. And that's something that, I think with grief, we imagine that we need to somehow muscle through this or that we have to figure this out or other people figured it out better. And they're not necessarily talking about how they did it. So Dani, what helps with grief? Like, this is a perfect segue to the next slide.
Totally. And before I go there, I'll even say, as you're talking, I love you for bringing up the point that it sounds sort of rosy when we talk about, the beauty of change and stuff, but I will just self-disclose, I hate change. I hate it. I despise it. And beauty and fear live so close, but like, it scares the bejeebers out of me. It makes me uncomfortable. And so it's really easy to sit up here and sort of talk philosophically about this stuff. But there's a deep pain to it as well. So we can probably go there later, but what helps? So what helps? Unfortunately or not, unfortunately, I don't know if you agree, Ladybird, but I feel like there's just no like shortcut to grief, right? We have to work through it. The grief has to be felt in order to do this thing that we're talking about, which is, finding a way to continue living on without someone we loved. So it's super cliched, and I can feel sort of the eye rolls in my head when I say this, but time, right? Time helps, and self-care helps. Getting up, showering, going outside, making connections. For many of us, our morning practices, whatever they may be in our culture and in our faith, may help. And I think this was one of the sort of most cruel pieces of people who had losses during the pandemic, was that so many of our morning rituals got taken away from us. We had to grieve those too, right? We couldn't do them. And I guess I would also add, it helps to find a place for your grief to be experienced or expressed. It doesn't have to be just one place or one way to do this, right? Tell a journal, tell a friend, go on a walk and tell the loved one who died, right? Tell it to the universe if you want, take a primal scream when you need a scream, or a big uncontrolled cry when you need to cry. Yeah. And I will add, sorry, and then I'll pass it over, but another thing that comes to mind is that if you do, having warning that a death is coming, I think is a blessing and a curse. But if you do have warning, I think we have a lot of evidence that the things you do before death, right? Making it a death that honors the person, right? A good death, having clear communication, saying the things that need to be said, those really impact our experience of grief.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Actually, what I was thinking of was what helps is reverence. Having, holding your life as sacred, right? Holding what has happened to you as sacred and that it matters, and not carrying the weight of what was as like this very heavy bag of bones that you feel like you have to drag with you. Otherwise, you can't prove that your life mattered, or that that person mattered, or that who you were mattered. But holding reverence for life, for yourself, and for what's happening allows that space to kind of soften a little bit, so that you're honoring the grief, you're honoring what's happened there. And so even in terms of tending to, like, you're given the time to say your goodbyes, or to say goodbye to someone else. And it doesn't mean that you need to do everything perfectly, that you have to get everything wrapped up in a bow. Holding that reverence, even a few moments in the day, is really the same as all of the preparation in my mind. I mean, it doesn't take away the chaos of things that are not prepared. So I don't mean to make light of the beauty and the grace of preparation.
Yeah.
And sometimes that preparation pushes us to remember that we cared about something, right? It's the same thing with ritual. Ritual is a path to reminding us that something is sacred and that it matters. Rituals in and of themselves aren't like magical hoax things that that make things happen, but they call our attention to, oh, this matters, I care. Coming up with your advance directives, doing those pieces actually reminds you that you care about something, and it brings your attention to curiosity and love and beauty. Again, the other expression of grief, which is love, so that you can kind of pull yourself there. And to your point about sharing it, it makes me think about grief as being more digestible if it's shared. Just like a meal can be more enjoyable. Not always. I live by myself. I am fine eating alone, but there is something in the quality of sharing a meal, even if it's just a muffin on the bench with somebody that I don't even know, that something happens where it goes into me differently. And it's the same with grief. When you can share that grief, even with just one person or even a cat, there's something that happens again with the movement of that energy, so that you're not digesting it alone. And you remember that you belong in the world, that you're not experiencing grief alone. I think that's the other piece, that, there isn't someone that's separate from grief, just like death. There isn't someone who's going to somehow make it through this life without dying. And similarly, there isn't anyone that you will encounter that isn't walking with their own stories of grief. So it's a shared experience that it's helpful to know that we're in a shared experience, even if you feel alone in it.
Oh, and even before we keep going, I was going to say,
Oh, yeah.
You made me think, all of my life wisdom came from Mr. Rogers when I was younger, but one of my favorite Mr. Rogers quotes that made me think of is, he said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And I do think you're right.
If
Like,
it's mentionable,
there's
it's
something
manageable.
that makes things more digestible when we just invite them to be with us instead of trying to push them away from us. And I also super appreciate you bringing up this perfection idea, because it's hard. I think in the what helps slide is self-compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion, right? We are doing our best. This is possibly one of the hardest things any of us will ever experience in this lifetime. It is both
Mhm.
universal, as you're saying, but also deeply, deeply difficult. And so
Yeah.
the self-compassion that comes with always knowing we're doing our best to get through this as gracefully as we can.
Yeah. And then sometimes it feels like we're not getting through it. For
So
sure.
totally. So the complicated side of grief, right? Grief is not always so clean, right? The loss of a loved one, we talked about, I guess, I don't want to say normalcy of grief, but you said it earlier, right? It's not this diagnosis, it's not this pathological thing. And yet the loss of a loved one can trigger depression. It can trigger
Mm.
PTSD. It can trigger, what people call pathological grief. And we made the point earlier that while grief can be, excruciatingly painful, it serves on some level, right? It helps us to heal. It helps us to
Oh,
honor.
sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Whereas some of these other entities actually get in the way of our ability to experience and process our grief. So, when do we know if we need more help? How do we know? I mean, my first thought is that if you feel like you need more help, reach out, right?
Mhm.
Reach out. I would rather somebody reach out than not, any day of the week. I would add, I hate doing this because we're sitting here talking about how individual grief is, but I will say that in general, there are no hard and fast rules. But the thought is that while grief never ends, that for most of us, the worst of somebody's negative experience with grief will usually peak by 6 to 12 months. Not to say that it's wrong if it hasn't, but if you're really not feeling any relief seeping in that time frame, absolutely reach out and see if something else might be going on. If you have a history of, mental health struggles, if you have a history of a complicated relationship with the person that you lost, right? If there's guilt, regret, mixed feelings, all of these things can be aware of it, can be risk factors. So just be aware of that, because sometimes we slip out of grief and into something that isn't serving us quite as well. So
Yeah, I think the challenge is that, like, reaching out before you get into trouble. I had a client say to me at one point, "Well, if I hit a roadblock, I'll call you." And I said, "I would love it if you called me before
when you see the road,
when you see the roadblock coming, then call me, and then we'll see if we even need to go to the roadblock. Maybe we can go a different direction." And we generally can feel things arising in us, and we maybe are ashamed of it, or we're frustrated by it, annoyed with it. We see it as a failure of somehow not being as strong, or again, managing. This culture is so focused on managing things, and grief is not to be managed. But if it arises in you and you realize, I don't want to get out of bed, I haven't taken a shower for a week, I realize I'm not actually eating very well, I'm not eating the things that would nourish me, I'm not finding enjoyment in eating. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but these small things start to add up, and sometimes you're the only one noticing them. And so having the courage, and it does take courage, I'll be honest about that, to share that grief. Like Dani was saying, once it's shared, there's something about it where it becomes real. And then once something is real, we can look at it together, right? Versus something that becomes such a huge phantom behind you that you're not sure what part of it is feeling real and what part of it isn't. When you bring it out to somebody else, then together you can determine, what that is. So
and you
there's
can hold
support
the
in
weight
many
of it
ways.
together a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
I love what you're saying too, like the distinction a little. I think you were getting at the grief versus depression, particularly that distinction, but we talked earlier about grief being dynamic, right? We can be,
Mhm.
remembering something fondly one moment and then sad one moment, and then, it moves. And depression is not dynamic, right? Depression is sort of the opposite. It's a perpetual grayness. Everything is sad. Everything has hopelessness. There can't be joy found in any of the moments. And so there are distinctions, right? Or
Mhm.
sadness, I get into the car and it makes me think of my husband and I feel sad. Okay, that's grief. I can't get into the car because I start having panic
Right.
attacks or flashbacks. Okay, now we're starting to tread on PTSD. And so there is a real difference. And if you're
Yeah.
wondering, or if something inside of you says like doesn't feel right in some way, I agree, bring it and we'll hold it together. We'll look at it together.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we should open up to questions.
Yeah, and we've had a few while you guys were chatting. Ladybird, if you want to close the slides, I can read this one.
Mhm. Let's see if I can do that.
Strong word.
Stop.
There you go. Perfect.
Technological success.
Woo!
So Anne said, many of my patients say the nighttime, the alone time is the hardest. What do you suggest?
I agree. I'll just say first, I agree. The nighttime is the hardest time for me as well. Finding ways to support yourself in the night, if that means, even listening to a podcast, listening to a meditation practice, calling somebody if they're in another time zone and you happen to live in a place where you can actually call somebody, reading a book. I mean, letting yourself be with that moment of distress and then finding some things that can support you, right? For me, at least, that's what I have done in the nighttime, because the nighttime can be crazy making time and feel emotionally, and I think even hormonally, it's not the same as during the day. I don't think we are actually operating with the same brain capacity. So I think it's important to not try to do the same tasks, but to do really nourishing, soothing teas, music, pets, loved ones. I don't know.
I would add, I think part of the nighttime phenomena that I agree with is space, right? The sheer amount of open space in your brain at night is so big, and it just creates such a big bucket for these, thoughts to start coming and swimming in. And in the daytime, we even just putting our attention on, I need to make lunch right now. I need to pick my clothes right now. I need to answer this phone call right now. There is less space in which these thoughts can swim around at night. I think that is at least part of the reason why the nighttime gets us so much. And so I think the answer is in two places, for me at least. One of them is, I think what you're touching upon, Ladybird, is that if you can find calming things that can take some of the space away or some of the attention, listening to an audio book, listening to a guided meditation, anything along those lines, I think the space becomes a little bit less. But I think the other piece is, I think we're all working on beefing our capacity to be present with the things that creep up when there is space. And as they creep up at night, I think it's a little bit of a chance to say, all right, here's this distress. It's been waiting to get a little bit of airtime with me. It's not pleasant, but it's here right now. And I can be with that. Like, I can tolerate feeling these feelings right now. I can, I don't have to resist them as bad as they feel. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's like that mixture, that both and, right? And you as an individual, I hate to say the word responsible, but you're responsible in the middle of the night to be able to titrate what is appropriate for you in that moment, right? So some nights you just know, like, oh my gosh, I only got 5 hours of sleep the night before. It would be great if I went through this and felt my grief, but I actually really need to sleep, right? Yeah. Versus another night where you realize nothing is pressing for me tomorrow. I really feel the wave right now, and I know that I can do this. And so again, there isn't a right or a wrong, like, oh, you have to muscle through it, or you should fill the space. Finding that place to be able to hear your own voice about what you need is really the journey with working with grief.
Yeah. Or even thinking through, it's like, is there a different place that I can, I'm going to find a way to shift my attention as best I can. Is there a different place or time that I can make space for this? Because I don't think we want to. I mean, at least for me, we often don't want. It's easier to not, to not sit in that space. So, and then comes the compassion piece. I will say it with every question on any talk I give, but this is the time to say, yeah, night times are hard for me, and to give yourself the hug that you need. But
yeah.
Thanks, guys. We've got a few more that came in. This one is for Ladybird. I said, can you repeat what you said toward the onset of grief related to the loss of the promise of what is awaiting? You were talking about chronic illness and the transition of acceptance. Do you remember the beautiful?
No, I think I do. I mean, I think we were talking about the threshold space that, you realize that you've been told, or you're experiencing an illness in your body, you go to the medical professionals, they tell you, yes, this is happening. And then you have this sort of this thing in front of you of like, oh, this thing is meeting me. You haven't fully met it yet. You haven't integrated it into your life. It's there. It's like, it's presented itself, but it hasn't been integrated yet. So you're in this liminal space where you're grieving what you're not going to be anymore. It's already gone in some ways, but you haven't had time to actually be with that yet. So you're in this liminal space of a threshold space, right? And what I was saying is that in America, at least, there's not a lot of honoring of thresholds. We are here and then we're there. And you're supposed to just bounce over there with glee and joy and ease, and everything's arranged. And it's never that way, hardly. Even positive thresholds require an acknowledgement of something that is no longer happening. A marriage, you're like, oh my God, there goes my singleness, the rest of my life. No, sorry. But we joke and we only acknowledge it with the positives because they're easier, and the threshold is even then not acknowledged in the same way. We're not really allowed to acknowledge the distress, the fear, all of the things that come with the transition. So really what I was speaking to is making space for that transition, to actually stretching it out a little bit, like, oh my God, this is a change. I'm changing. I don't know what's happening. I'm not ready. I need some support. And it's okay to not be ready for that change.
Yeah. And you speak about American culture, but I would also say, like, possibly even worse in medical culture, right? We don't do well sitting in between with people. We like to close things off, check this box, get to the next, but there's a lot in that in between for sure.
Yeah, great. And we've got a hand up, Deb. I'm going to unmute you here.
Oh, Deb Vale. Hi.
You may have to, there you go, Deb. Deb, can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Deb.
Hi. My question is, well, I think you just gave a really great introduction there kind of to it, Ladybird, but, I've just decided I'm not doing any more treatment. And so I'm in this place here of just real poignancy, I guess. Of just every moment feeling, and then of course I start crying, feeling so special and so beautiful, just like, it's just small things, an ant crawling over my leg, or, the sunset, or any of that. And I'm just I'm feeling lonely in that, because it feels like too much to share that all the time. My husband is wonderful with me. I have a lot of friends, and some people can kind of sit with me in that space, but it's so much moment to moment through the day of just, that place where you're talking about where, beauty and grief meet, praise, Stephen Jenkinson speaks so well of it, and Die Wise, and Martine Prichtel, and, the smell of rain on dust, and that place where everything's going to end, and so you treasure it all. And I would love to be able to be more present with the people around me in that, but I think sometimes they feel I'm being morose or negative, or whatever I'm setting off in them by sharing that. But then if I keep it back, I feel like I'm not being present in my own experience. So if you could speak to that, or maybe give me some clues as to how to do that a little bit more truthfully and gracefully.
Oh, Deb, thank you for sharing that with us, actually, in this moment on this call, to be able to, for just even a second, sit in that mystery with you. And I'll respond first, Dani, just because I started talking. I'm sorry. But I guess what's coming to me is, almost that realization that the grief we feel when we realize that everyone can't hold us, that the world has its has its boundaries and its, I don't want to say limits, but its boundaries, right? And that the beauty within us is so profound at times that even we can't hold it, right? So we tend to not acknowledge it very often. And so you're sitting in a place of allowing this to arise in you and to experience it, and maybe just feeling that grief, as horrible as that is to say. It's like feeling the grief of like, oh my gosh, they aren't able to be there, but I'm still here. And it's there's again that moving that through you, continuing to allow what's happening to happen, and not necessarily being comfortable with it, right? It sounds like you're doing an incredible, what you're offering to yourself and the world is just quite profound. So I don't know that there's anything different that I would do, but there might be some tricks and tools that Dani has that I'd like to hear as well.
Deb, similar to Ladybird, I wanted to start with a thank you. I thank you for the way you shared that was so beautiful. And ironically, I was literally yelling at my child before starting this because they had left a piece of food on the floor, and before starting, 2 ants had crawled on my leg, and it was so distracting, and I got so irritated by the experience. So it's so funny to me that you picked that as an example, but thank you for putting me in touch with that, right? Reminding me to be grateful for every moment, because it is hard when you're not acutely faced with your mortality to hold on to that perspective. So that was a gift for me. So thank you. And when I was hearing you think, and I was trying to think about, why is this so easy for me to take in what she's giving, and why is it maybe harder for the people around her? And the first thought that came to my mind along the lines of what you were saying about how beauty and pain come hand in hand is that I'm sure the people around you love the insight you're bringing, but I'm sure it holds with it the pain of losing you.
Yeah.
Right. Every time you take them to this honest place, it's forcing them to sit with the fact that yes, these moments are beautiful, but they're losing you.
Yeah.
And everyone's capacity to sit with that, and for how long they're going to be able to sit with that, is it's not infinite. I feel like you've actually gotten, it sounds like, when you're speaking to a really I don't want to say enlightened, but really a really beautiful place with your relationship to mortality. And I think it probably is hard for the people around you to accept, to the degree that you're accepting the idea of losing you.
Yeah.
So it might be packaged in that. And I know that's not a fix. It's not it's not easy.
Well, I want to say to both of you and all of you at Mettle, like, you all meet me in that place, which is why I'm here in these webinars and, working with BJ and going on the website and Facebook and all of that. So I want to thank you for that, because you know me, but you're not in that place of grief. So of me dying. So, and you have the experience. So I want to thank you for the service that you are constantly providing here. So it really makes a difference for me to know that somebody understands, and just even you witnessing that. Like, I think next time I'm in one of those places that's so poignant, I'll just draw you guys there with me and say, okay, they're here with me. Yeah, they're here. Spirit. So
Absolutely. The connection is mutual.
well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deb. And someone just wrote hugs to the person who is speaking. So
Be connecting to both of us right now.
yeah.
I think I want to just speak to that, because Deb, what you're bringing is such an important part. It's something, again, that we don't talk about a lot, even in palliative medicine or in hospice care. I remember this a lot at Zen Hospice Project, but the journey for the people staying and for the person leaving, they're different journeys. They have absolutely different qualities, and yet we tend to want to get everybody on the same boat, and we're not on the same boat. I can't remember who gave me this beautiful analogy of, but like these boats, side by side, that we're going together, but we're actually in our own boats on the same water. And so what I need in my boat is actually different than what you need in your boat, and that's okay. And so once we acknowledge that, then we realize, oh, we're still connected. We're just having a really different experience, but it doesn't mean that we're not connected. And to have that permission to be on your journey and other people on their journey, hopefully we'll have more permission for that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And I do like that image you bring up, Deb, of like holding on to in these moments, even my kids have this book, it's The Invisible String, and it's about these strings that connect us to people even when they're not there. And if you're not feeling necessarily the connection that you're needed in the moment, just like holding on to all your invisible strings, all the people that have been able to hold this space with you and that are connected to you, like can really combat how alone we sometimes feel in these experiences. So.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Dani. Thanks, Dani. Thanks, Ladybird, for all of that. This next question, this is also from Anne. She said, families have indicated the last breath and the last vision of a loved one is the hardest. What would you say to them?
Yes, no.
Yes, I know. I was like, yes, that would be true.
I guess, I guess my first thought is that that's okay, right? That it makes sense. Wouldn't that be hard? Don't we in some ways want that to be hard because of the depth of how we felt about this person? I don't know, I'm kind of sitting with this one a little bit.
I like that. And don't we want it to be hard? I mean, I think there's a way that there's some gravity to that. It's like, yeah, this person mattered. Oh my gosh, they actually left. Death can feel like such a something that's going to happen. And then when it happens, it's like, I mean, for me, at least, I know the deaths that I've experienced, there's a moment where it almost doesn't feel real. It still hasn't, even that last breath, it's real, but it's like, maybe it's not, or I haven't woken up into the next day with the impact of it. So that moment is quite potent.
Yeah, one of my best friends in high school, I remember he died in an unexpected car accident, and I remember going to the funeral, and it was an open casket, and I looked in, and for a very long time I wished that I hadn't, because there was a very jarring sort of finality to seeing his face like that, seeing his body like that, and it was the memory that just kept popping in for a little while, and over time the other memories came into my head equally, but I think you're right. It really there's a deep poignancy to all the truth that's encompassed in that moment, all the truth that we don't want to be true.
Yeah, and I guess the question I would have is, and so like, how is it coming up in conversation? Like, are they telling you because they're reliving it again and again and it's distressing, or is this just this moment and maybe just asking more questions like, yeah, tell me about that. What do you remember? What was that like? Tell me about that person. Or I'm not sure, like that could lead to some other places, but usually clinicians, if we can talk less and not say something and actually encourage them to share what is wanting to be shared, they're not looking necessarily for us to say a magical thing. It's really just that acknowledgement that they're grieving and that this is hard.
It's a great point, like the beauty that comes with not trying to fix it, right? Because if we sit with it in the room, then the message that if we try to fix it, part of the message that we're sending is like, this is so intolerable. Even I can't handle it. Like, even I want this to be different. But when we sit with that, the message that we send is, yeah, this is unpleasant, but like, I can handle this. You can handle this. Like, we model that we can all handle this. And parts of this are going to be really hard. Versus like what you're saying, right? If you're having nightmares about that moment.
Right. Yeah. It depends on the context. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Do we lose?
I had a few more comments come in just as you guys were speaking about that. Madison said maybe looking at that moment of feeling gratitude in being with the person who is dying, both as holding space and being with the person as they're leaving. And then Anne also said, I run a support group and usually it's new loss. So seeing their loved one is hard. One person asked about the last kiss. I mean, it's, I think the last, whatever it is, last meal, last visit, you know, there's a lot of lasts that get attached to.
Yeah. And I think with that, I think that goes into the territory of the complicatedness of our grieving process. When I think about the people that I've lost and the last moments of those individuals, I can start to question, oh, could I if I had held their hand in this way, or if I had, you know, that those last moments are fraught with the terrain to just kind of relive it and question it, and oh, it could have been different, or if I only had done this. And so it is a territory of another better word, potent is really just the word. It's like there's a lot there, and so we can really sink into it with support, knowing that it's not going to take us over, and maybe, you know, emerge with that, the richness of that potency versus the neuroses of the potency. If we just kind of keep mashing it down.
It's a beautiful point, Ladybird, though, because we do go through life with this sort of belief that we get to iterate, right? That we get to have redos. You know, I say goodbye to my kids in the morning when I drop them off, believing that I will do the same thing the next day and the same thing the next day. And until there comes a point where we don't get to do it again.
Yeah.
And that's grief, right? That's
Yeah.
This person said, thank you so much for recommending The Wild Edge of Sorrow. Do either of you have any book recommendations specifically about the loss of a child?
I know that I can get some for you. I don't have my references handy.
I'll check in with you, Ladybird, because I
Okay,
told her I would
okay.
email her as well.
Okay,
So if we don't,
yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then let's
if I could just, to whoever wrote that also.
Oh yeah, please.
I just sending like virtual energy your way, because we briefly talked about how relationships are different, but I think there is something just uniquely so unthinkably painful about losing a child, and we don't have the time or space right now to do it justice, but I just want to put that comment into the universe.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This person said, can you talk about how grief shows up before someone dies? I'm trying to lead with love with my father who is dying, but I'm getting met with what feels like restraint and even annoyance.
Dani?
I guess I'm wondering, I want to sit down with this person.
I know.
Like, what does the leading with love look like? And, you know,
Where's the restraint coming from?
Yeah, where is it coming from? Who is it coming from? Like, what seems to trigger it? Because there's just, there's so much in there. And I think in part, you know, it's similar to what we were saying about the grief after death, as a grief before death is so varied, right? And it's going to look so different from person to person, and so different in all of us, different in you, different in, you know, your dad. And so I guess the biggest advice I would take is to try to sort of slow down and really notice what it is you're feeling, what it is you're coming up with, it's coming up for you, and try to, if they're open to it, figure out the same for the other person, which is not super helpful of a comment, but
it's doable, right? I mean, I think at the end, it's like really we can just take care of ourselves. Honestly, there's a lot that can happen that we maybe can offer, and some people will receive it or not. But if, like you're saying, leading with love, in my mind, that the image is leading, that you're out there, you're in love, you're walking in love, you're living in love, and people are responding and receiving your love when they can, but it's available to them. And so it becomes a a generous offering as versus a mandate, or something to aspire to. You're just cultivating this and you're experiencing it, and it's a part of your expression. And then people get to choose how they respond to that or not. But you don't have to stop leading with love, right?
And what does grief look like before a loss? And I'm not even sure if it was about yourself or your loved one, because those are two separate questions, but it looks like whatever it is that you're feeling right now, I guess, would be the best answer. And that's okay, whatever that happens to be.
You know, that question brought something up that I'm hoping both of you can address, as just what it looks like. You know, we talk a lot about love and grief because we love, but what about relationships where there isn't a lot of love between the person? Do you guys, and that's not really a question, it's more of just a general idea that I'm wondering if you guys can comment on.
Yeah, there's a lot of territory there for sharing, for doing some work, right, around anger and resentment and shame of still holding on to pieces or stories that were hurtful, that, you know, when we're traumatized, when we're very, very deeply hurt by people. And that's that, I hate to use the word work, but I can't think of another word right now, but like it becomes what you're working with, right? And to honor that this is a mess. There's a lot of emotion in there, and that you don't want it to get stuck in your system. You don't want to live another minute or 20 years with this grinding of your heart and turning in knots. And so for those complicated moments where the relationships are complicated, I really encourage getting support so that you can digest it with someone else.
Yeah, I think in it's different, but in a lot of ways, the grief is harder when the relationship was complicated, because it brings up a lot, and for some of us, I think it brings up feelings that feel more taboo to share. So here we are saying, you know, like, feel what you feel, share what you feel, you know, be connected to it. And yet I think when the feelings aren't as easily accepted by the world, it's harder to find a way to process them. So I agree, find the spaces to process them.
Yeah, the professionals, you know, not to say that other people aren't capable of holding those spaces, but you know, especially for people who have, you're losing someone who was abusing you, you know, there are layers to the psyche of what you're losing, and it warrants support. That's all I would say. There's no magical way to figure it out by yourself, and you don't need to figure it out by yourself.
All right, I know we're at time, but we have one final question. Are the two of you okay to go a couple minutes over? Okay, great. So this last question says, ideas for grieving your lost self in the context of serious illness.
Rituals, lovely. Even though I was making a kind of a snide comment about ritual earlier. Honoring, like reverence, right? Like that you can look to that lost self with as much love and appreciation and joy as you can muster. And if you didn't have a lot to begin with, that makes it even more poignant, right? That you didn't have a chance to love that self as much as you wanted to, and now that self isn't even there. And so, you know, ceremonies, celebrations, honoring, and really, honoring, I guess, is the word I would say.
Yeah. And I think I agree with that, spot on. And I would also say, I think for a lot of people, there's something to be found in legacy and in meaning. And, you know, I'm thinking now like the dignity therapy questions, where people are able to share, you know, the most poignant memories of their life, you know, the biggest lessons that they learned. But, and if you don't know dignity therapy, it's like a 2-hour commitment, and it's a beautiful interview, and you get to go through it. But anything that gives you the chance to sort of, like Ladybird was saying, honor and give voice to these pieces of you that they're gone, and yet they're still here. Again, we're in this dialectic. They're gone, and yet you still carry them with you. We probably in all truth have many lost selves that we have lost through our life and recreated ourselves over and over again. Yeah.
What's it called? Dignity
Therapy. It's
therapy.
it's beautiful. You do one session as the interview, and then the next session you get the transcription of what you said, and you can edit it as you want. And then you have a legacy document that you can sort of leave behind or pass on. But the questions alone are just very beautiful about what stands out to you most about your life. Tell me about like a memory that sticks with you. And it really goes through a series of questions that I think help people, both because they can leave a legacy behind for others, but also because it does just what we're talking about. It honors so much of our histories.
Beautiful. Well, thank you both so much for this discussion, and thanks everyone for being here. We wish everyone a good weekend, and yeah, again, thanks for spending your Friday morning with us.
Yeah, blessings.
Bye guys.
Bye.